I'm here with Bob Wilber, and I've been tossing names of musicians at him, and here's one who all three of us in this room revere, a fellow named Vic Dickinson.
Oh, yes.
What do you remember about Vic?
Oh, Vic is just a wonderful character. Had a totally unique way of playing the trombone. And I said, what's success? What's the secret of your success as a trombone player? He says, I play it all wrong. Because to this day, I think my favorite jazz trombone players would be Jack Teagarden and Vic Dickinson. He was just a marvelous, and he was the original player that I was trying to have with my band when I took the band to Boston to play at the George Weins Club, the Storyville. And he had started to work with Bobby Hackett, and he was tied up with Bobby, so I couldn't get him. So I said to Sidney, I was trying to get Vic on trombone, but I can't get him. He says, well, my brother's around town, why don't you have him, Wilber? So I ended up with Wilber, who was very good.
Yeah. I know you cross paths with Jack Teagarden now and again.
Yeah.
Because you're on a late record of his.
That's right.
In 1962.
Yeah.
What do you remember about him?
Well, I met Jack when we went to Nice when I was with Mesro's band, and of course he was with the newly formed Armstrong All-Stars. So I got to hear a lot of him playing in Nice, and he was just very nice, soft-spoken with this definite kind of southern accent. And I know that Armstrong had tremendous respect for his playing and featured Jack many times during a concert on playing solos and solo features. I think he used to do a striking version of da 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 dee da da
Lover, yeah.
Lover, and which has all these chromatic changes, and Jack's ear was so attuned to all kinds of interesting changes like that. He was a master of the instrument.
Yeah. So we've talked about everybody else, but let's talk about the man on the couch for a little bit.
Oh, okay.
Okay.
Oh, I'm him.
Yes, you're
okay.
him. You have a long career. You have a glorious career. You've been a player. You've been a composer. You've arranged. You've transcribed. You've led bands, big and small. You've done movie soundtracks. What are you most proud of? What do you remember with the most pleasure?
I remember my composition area of my playing and putting together a new composition. Start out with maybe a 1 4-bar phrase, and then I had to take it from there and figuring out where to take it, and say if it was a 32-bar song, what I would do in the bridge. And I would start to write, and I say, oh no, somebody's done that already. And so trying to write an original song, but not to copy anything else. I mean, I definitely was influenced in my composing by Duke Ellington very much.
That's not a bad place to be.
No.
Yeah.
Duke has had a marvelous original way of writing music, and of course the Ellington Band was a group where Duke wrote for the individual musicians. He wouldn't not write for the instrument. He'd write for the musicians who actually played it. So the players that stayed with him for a long time, of course, the baritone saxophone player
Harry Carney.
Harry Carney was, I think that was his very first job, and I think the story was that he had to get some kind of a note from his mother allowing him to, because he was maybe 17 or something when he joined the band, and he was with the band the whole rest of his life.
Yeah, from 1927 on
Yeah,
to his death.
that's right.
The other person we ought to talk about, if we've gotten, this is related to you, but when I've heard you play alto, you are the closest thing to Johnny Hodges I can think of. Did you cross paths with Johnny at all?
Johnny was a man of very few words, and all the beauty of his playing went into that horn, and he was spoken in kind of a gruff voice. He was questioned by a lady, and some of the band overheard the comment when she went backstage, and Johnny Hodges had played the solo with the Ellington band, where he was down at the microphone, and he would just stand there and be absolutely not even a foot tapping, play the melody like Daydream, or one of those ballads that Duke wrote for him, or Billy Strayhorn. And this lady said, Mr. Strayhorn, I just want to ask you,
Mr. Hodges.
Mr. Hodges, I want to ask you a question. I noticed that you stand there perfectly, absolutely not with the movement except for the fingers on the alto as you play this beautiful melody. And the only other movement I noticed was that your eyes look around the house. And what were you doing? What were you looking at? He says, I was checking the exits and counting the house. But that was Johnny Hodges.
Yeah.
Checking the exits and counting the house.
You mentioned somebody who we all are fascinated by, and you're on one of his recordings. That's Billy Strayhorn.
Oh yeah.
So you and Clark are the front line in the little Strayhorn group.
That's right. Yeah.
Did
yeah.
you encounter Billy? Did you talk with him at all?
I did, but I never got to know him really well. But I just admired his playing and his compositions. Many of the things that he wrote for Hodges, including up-tempo things and ballads and everything, are just marvelous. He was like a right-hand man for Ellington for so many years, and I think so many things that Ellington gets credit for, I think Billy very possibly could have been involved in doing some of the writing. He was a very modest man, and he didn't mind the fact that Ellington was getting all the credit, and he was sort of a background figure, but he was a very important part of Ellington's career.
Since you mentioned modest people who don't always get credit, let's finish this segment off by talking about bass players.
Oh yes.
You worked with one of my heroes, George Duvivier.
Oh really? Yeah, I did. Yeah, I worked with George at a time when I had my own band, and I was also working with Kenny DeVerne. We had a small band, and our favorite bass players were George Duvivier and Milt Hinton.
That's not bad.
And if they were both very busy freelancing around New York, so if I couldn't get Milt, I would call George. You know, they were very different players, but both of them brilliant soloists and great time.
Yeah, and on the other side of things, you also worked. Pops Foster was the bassist in Mez's band.
That's right. Yeah, Pops Foster
Yeah.
was, and he claims to be the first bass player to actually put down the bow and pluck the strings in New Orleans. But he had marvelous time and played a simpler style than the later bass players, who were greatly influenced by Jimmy Blanton with Duke Ellington's band. But he played a lot of tonic notes and fifths and fourths. But he would also walk a line beautifully and played marvelous solos when he would often take up the bow and bow the solo. And he was a delightful guy. He was with my original band at the Savoy Cafe.
Oh, so that's with Henry Goodwin and Jimmy Archie
yeah.
and you.
Yeah, that's right.
Yeah. What do you remember about Henry Goodwin? There's somebody nobody talks about.
Henry was a lovely guy. He had an opportunity to go with Ellington, and he had subbed with Ellington, but somehow he wasn't able to do it, so he never did go with Ellington. But he was a marvelous trumpet player, and he specialized, worked with mute, and he did his kind of version of Cootie Williams, and but an easygoing, lovely guy, and he was a big, tall guy, 6 foot tall, and beside him would be Jimmy Archie, who was about 5'5" maybe.
Yeah.
And these two, they were a great team together, and I was very happy to have them in my original band with Dick Wellston, and I were the only white players in the band, and we had Tommy Benford on drums, and Pops Foster, and
Who we think?
the trombone player.
Jimmy Archie.
Jimmy Archie was a very distinctive player who had his own style of playing, and he and Henry Goodwin were a great team, brass team.
It's a great place to start out. You know.
Yeah.
So,
Yeah.
thank you, Bob. Thank you
Okay.
for all the stories.
Okay.
Okay.
Thank you.